I remember that morning like frost on glass, sharp, unforgiving, and impossible to forget. February 3rd, 1959. The kind of cold that splits skin, where even breath feels like shattered glass in your lungs. 6 of us were packed into a C-124 Globemaster, hauling standard cargo north out of Elmendorf. Routine flight, routine orders, nothing worth remembering. I was 23 then, still half kid, serving as the radio operator for Flight 419. My gloves were cracked, fingertips bleeding from the dry air, but I was used to it. The kind of used to it that soldiers learn when the world doesn't care if you freeze. The pre-flight line shimmered with exhaust haze. The plane looked like a steel whale sleeping under floodlights, its fuselage rimed with a thin crust of ice. We were waiting for final checks. The pilot, Captain Harris, was a quiet man, steady, squared away, the kind who never shouted because he didn't need to. Beside him sat his co-pilot, Lieutenant Collins, a fresh butter bar out of Texas who believed warmth gave him wisdom. The navigator, Green, was pale and nervous, the kind of man who'd aged twice as fast as his years. Dalton, the flight engineer, kept chewing gum like he was trying to grind down his nerves. Then there was Sykes, our loadmaster, a joker who'd never met a silence he didn't try to fill. 6 men in a metal coffin built to crawl through ice and sky. We'd done this route a dozen times, north to Fairbanks and back. No one expected trouble. The airfield was quiet, except for the wind whistling through hangars and the cough of the auxiliary unit. Harris read the forecast. Light snow, crosswind steady out of the northwest. Nothing ugly, nothing worth writing down. Collins grumbled that the coffee tasted like mop water. Sykes slapped his gloves against the side of the plane to break off the frost and muttered, "If this cold gets any worse, I'll lose a finger before takeoff." We laughed, because that's what you do when you're too numb to care. I was already strapped into my seat, headset on, checking frequencies and antenna rotation. The static was clean. I logged our call sign with control, received acknowledgement, marked the time, everything routine. Except one small twitch. The magnetic needle on the panel gave a lazy drift, a half-hearted bounce left and right before settling again. A flicker, nothing more. I noted it. Minor magnetic interference near Hayes Range. We'd seen it before. Everyone blamed Mount Hayes. The stories were old. Survey teams losing radio contact, compasses spinning, watches running too fast. Locals whispered that something beneath the mountain messed with instruments. Command said geology. Old hands said nonsense. But everyone lauded it when it happened. I did too. Neat letters in the flight book, as if routine notes could hold back unease. Outside, the world had gone colorless, snow swirling over the tarmac until ground and sky blended into one pale smear. February in Alaska always looked like the earth had been erased. The maintenance crew signed us off, engines ready, fuel full, oil steady. Dalton patted one of the cargo straps and said, "If that shifts, we'll die fast." Polite way to go. We boarded with that kind of dark humor soldiers wear like armor. Inside, the cabin smelled of metal and hydraulic fluid, a cold so dense it had a weight of its own. Harris sealed the hatch and told Tower we were ready to taxi. Takeoff was slow and sure. No bounce, no yaw. The C-124 never left into the air. It dragged itself skyward like something that didn't want to leave the ground. The runway lights fell away beneath us, swallowed by haze. The engines settled into their long, steady hum, the heartbeat of the machine. Control handed us off for northbound climb, their voices calm, almost bored. Flight 419, maintain heading and altitude. Roger that. Everything sounded ordinary, exactly as it should. Above the storm line, the light turned strange, a bruised blue-gray spilling across the windshield. The mountains below looked like frozen ribs under a blanket of snow. Nothing alive moved down there. Not a plume of smoke, not a trail, just the ghostly sweep of white ridges stretching forever. Routine flight, routine silence. Green hunched over his charts. Dalton watched his gauges, like a parent watch of the anarchist. The first one was best known, and then he backed it into a match. I quickly wrote it down into the wall. He warned me, "I see you now." Collins cracked his knuckles and hummed through his teeth. Sykes' voice drifted over the interphone from the cargo bay, muttering songs under his breath. Harris stared ahead, hands easy on the yoke, eyes calm. I remember thinking how peaceful it looked, how still the world seemed beneath us. I kept the radio log. Weather, clear. Airspeed, steady. Heading, confirmed. Control called to check altitude. Collins repeated the numbers back, crisp and certain. Everything normal. Too normal. I still hear Green's voice saying, 2 hours of boredom, boys." Dalton chuckled. Sykes asked if anyone had working heat because his toes were turning to ice. Collins told him to toughen up. You want heat, go back to Texas. Sykes laughed and told him to earn his rank by fetching coffee. That kind of banter kept the edges soft. I rubbed my hands together, trying to feel warm through the gloves, and thought, another Noke run, nothing to worry about, just another cold day in the north. But 30 minutes into that flight, something subtle began to shift. Small things, like threads loosening from a uniform seam. The first sign was a vibration, not turbulence, just a soft rattle deep in the frame. The radio hissed with a grainy distortion, as if sand were caught in the frequency. I adjusted the contact, tapped the headset, no fix. Then Green cursed under his breath, staring at his compass. It's twitching, he said. I leaned over to see. The needle shivered, swung hard left, then slowly drifted back to center. Nothing you could call failure, just wrong enough to notice. The temperature dropped fast, sharp enough that breath fogged in front of my mouth. I glanced at the frost creeping along the inside of the glass. Inside, that shouldn't happen. Dalton checked the heaters. Gauges said normal. Hell with that, he muttered, rubbing his palms together. I could see his breath. The air itself felt different, dense, pressing, almost alive. Then came the sound, not static, a rhythm. Soft clicks in my left ear, perfectly spaced. Tick, 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 like someone tapping a pencil beside the microphone. I keyed the interphone. You guys hot micing back there? Negative from all stations. Quiet as a church, Sykes said. And if there's a ghost tapping, tell him to keep the beat. Forced laughter. No one joined in. Outside, the world was flat gray and endless. Ahead lay Mount Hayes, invisible in the overcast but heavy in every man's mind. They said compasses spun near it, that survey radios went dead, that hikers vanished. We'd laughed at those stories on the ground. Up here, they didn't seem funny. Control called again, asking for position. Harris replied, Flight 419 on course, altitude steady. A pause. Then we heard our own voice come back. Same words, same tone, but late, echoing faint and stretched, as if the transmission had looped through a tunnel. I looked at Harris. He looked at me. No one said it, but everyone felt it. That's when I started writing again in the logbook. Calm block letters masking the tremor in my hand. Magnetic irregularity persisting. Cabin temperature dropping. Frost forming internally. I didn't know it then, but that was the last line I would write that still sounded like routine. The shift came on so quietly that none of us noticed at first. The horizon began to lose its edge, blurring like ink bleeding through wet paper. At that altitude, daylight already felt thin, but this was different, like the sky itself was being erased. The gray line that separated mountain from cloud faded until it became a single smear of pale light. My instrument still read normal, though the panel lighting flickered every few seconds like a heartbeat skipping. I leaned closer to the glass and watched the world flatten. It looked as though the land below was dissolving, detail by detail, into one smooth, formless expanse. The radio hiss clawed into my ears, faint but relentless. The clicking that had started earlier was still there, soft, deliberate, too regular to be natural. I tried to ignore it. Green muttered something about compass drift, tapping the casing with a pencil. It's spinning again, he said, his voice pinched tight. Harris didn't answer. He kept his gaze straight ahead, jaw set, hands steady on the yoke. The cabin temperature fell another few degrees. Frost had crept up the side window beside me, threading like veins across the glass. Inside, frost meant a failure in pressurization or heat balance, but the system read fine. Dalton shook his head, staring at the numbers. Cabin heat's good, he muttered, confused. His breath fogged silver in front of his face. Shouldn't be doing this. I could feel the air change, thicker, heavier, carrying that sterile, metallic cold that tastes like snow before it falls. I was just starting to note the anomaly when the headset caught a whisper. Not static, voices, soft and overlapping, too low to pick out words. It lasted a heartbeat, then vanished. Anyone transmitting? I asked. Negative, Sykes replied through the interphone. Just your imagination, radio man. But his voice wasn't joking now. Collins leaned toward the windshield and frowned. We're still over the range, right? Because I can't see the ridge lines anymore. Green traced his finger across his chart. We should be seeing haze off the port side any minute. Should, Collins repeated, uneasy. The compass needle trembled and froze mid-swing, neither north nor west, suspended like it couldn't decide which way the world was turning. The outside light dimmed further, the air glowing faintly. No sun, no shadow, just a colorless haze. Control called through, faint but audible. Flight 419, confirm your altitude. Harris responded clearly, 419 holding at 9,000. Then, seconds later, our own call echoed back again. Same transmission, slightly delayed, distorted. The pitch was wrong, slower, like an old recording we played off speed. For a moment, nobody spoke. I saw Harris's eyes flick toward me, searching for an explanation I didn't have. The intercom cracked with a forced laugh from Sykes. "Guess we've got an echo channel up here. Radio ghosts checking in." No one laughed back. The silence after that felt alive. Every man listening, waiting for the next noise. When it came, it wasn't what we expected. Harris said quietly, "Control, be advised. Possible traffic at 12 o'clock. Same altitude, same profile." My stomach dropped. Same type meant another C-124. There it was. A shape materialized in the distance. A bulky silhouette matching our aircraft perfectly. Same tail height, same rhythm of motion in the turbulence. It wasn't crossing. It was leading us, nose to nose with the same heading. "Jesus," Collins whispered. "That can't be right. We're the only heavy running this track," Green said flatly, staring. I flicked radar on and watched two returns bloom on the screen. One was us. The other sat dead ahead, steady, unwavering. Control's voice came back, calm and clipped. "Copy. Flight 419. We're painting 2 contacts at your position." 2. They confirmed it. Dalton muttered a curse, rubbing at the frost on his window. Reflection maybe, ice echo, terrain bounce. He wanted to believe it. So did I. But it was too clean, too precise. The other C-124 held its distance perfectly, like it was tethered to us by invisible wire. Harris didn't chase or adjust. He just watched, calculating. I could see the tight lines around his mouth now, the calm starting to crack. "Keep your instruments live," he ordered. "Nobody touches a dial unless I say so." Then the lights went out. Not a flicker, a full blackout. The cabin fell into a single breath of darkness, total and absolute. In that 1 second, the world vanished. My heartbeat hammered so hard I could hear it over the silence. Then power surged back. Panels glowed to life. Gauges spun wildly and settled again. It was over as quickly as it began. "What the hell was that?" Collins barked. "Electrical spike?" Dalton snapped. "Generators look fine." I swallowed hard, pressure stabbing my ears like we were diving, though altitude hadn't changed. The pain spread through my jaw, hot and sharp. I swallowed again. Nothing. Harris frowned at the altimeter. "Pressure shift," he said. "Hold steady." I logged it with shaking fingers. Momentary power loss. Cabin pressure fluctuation. Instruments cycling. My handwriting looked crooked, unfamiliar. The static was gone, replaced by a hollow hum, so low it vibrated in my teeth. For the first time since takeoff, I felt afraid. Not the quick kind, the slow kind that grows from your gut. Harris was trying to call control again, but their reply came warped, stretched, like the words were dragging through water. The voice that answered didn't sound like the same operator. It sounded older, raspy, tired. "Say position again, 419, it repeated. I gave coordinates. They didn't match Green's chart. He double-checked. I'd read them right, but they were wrong. Dalton cursed, tapping his gauges, altimeters jumping. The needle spiked up, dropped, steadied, then rose again in jolts. Airspeed twitched next, followed by oil temp. The readings were alive, flickering like candle flames. "They're lying," he said hoarsely. "They're all lying." But the engine sounded normal, deep, steady, even. Nothing matched anymore. Not sound, not sight, not numbers. I leaned to the side window again and froze. The world below us wasn't white now. The snowfields had darkened, taking on the sheen of wet metal. The same ridges and rivers were still there, but the colors were wrong. Steel and ash, like the light had changed source. "It looks different," I murmured. No one answered. The compass began to spin again. Slow revolutions, like a clock hand with no end. Green whispered something under his breath. "Not possible. Not possible." The cabin sound dimmed further, as if the air itself had thickened. The drone of engines faded into the background, like someone had stuffed cotton into our ears. I pressed my palm to the panel. It was trembling, but muted, like the vibration was happening a few inches away from reality. Then the smell hit. Burnt insulation, that sick, electric scent of heated wire. I ducked under the console, checking for glow. Nothing. No smoke, no spark, just that smell. Dalton noticed it too. His lips moved, but no sound came for a moment. He looked terrified. Harris's voice cut through the dead air. "Green, give me a clean fix." Green was already scribbling. His pencil scratched furiously across the chart, tracing bearings, drift lines, recalculations. He froze, then looked up, pale as snow. "We're too high," he said. "Way above ceiling. We shouldn't be able to hold altitude with this load." "You sure?" Harris asked. 3 times, Green replied. "We're past the range, too far east." Harris didn't respond. He just stared ahead at that other plane. still gliding in perfect formation. The same type, the same markings, the same movement, and I realized then, with a sick twist of certainty, that whatever was flying in front of us wasn't another aircraft at all. It was us. It took a few seconds for the thought to sink in, but once it did, the air in the cockpit seemed to collapse. The second plane, our mirror in the sky, moved exactly when we moved, rolled when we rolled, matched our angle for angle. I watched Harris adjust the yoke by a hair, and the other C-124 banked with us in perfect sync, like it was our reflection painted onto the clouds. Collins leaned forward, eyes wide, and whispered, "We're chasing ourselves." His voice barely made it through the static. Harris didn't respond. His hands were rigid, locked around the controls, jaw grinding tight. I checked the radar again. 2 solid contacts, not one. "Control," I called into the mic. "Flight 419 experiencing interference, possible duplicate contact." 10 seconds later, my own voice came back through the headset. Same words, same inflection, but slowed, warped, like a recording played underwater. Then more voices followed. Ours again, layered, overlapping, faint. We were hearing our own transmissions bleed through time. Dalton muttered something under his breath, but the words were lost in the noise. The cabin lights flickered once, twice, then steadied again. "This is impossible," Green whispered. He didn't finish. The compass needle was spinning now. Full revolutions, a lazy turn like it had stopped caring where North lived. Collins pressed his hand to the window and peered forward. "That's us," he said again, voice flat and disbelieving. "That's our bird." Harris finally spoke. "We're turning right 5 degrees. If they're real, they'll stay straight." He eased the yoke. The aircraft ahead of us mirrored perfectly, rolling with us, even the turbulence patterns matching ours. Not a second's delay. "Still there," Dalton said hoarsely. "Jesus, still there." The radio screamed without warning. Static erupted, then silence. Then a voice. Not control, not any frequency I knew. Something that sounded like it had been recorded and replayed through a broken throat. Words blurred, but buried underneath the distortion, I heard our call sign again and again, repeating like a warning, "Flight 419, Flight 419. Then the lights died a second time. Total black. The hum of engines still carried, but every gauge, every bulb, every sound cut out, except for the drone of those props chewing the frozen air. I could hear the fabric of my seat creak under my fists. 1 second of darkness felt like an hour. Then, a single heartbeat later, light exploded back, so bright it made us squint. Gauges spun, needles slammed against glass and then stabilized again. Dalton slammed his hand on the panel. Electrical surge. "What the hell is happening?" Harris kept steady, voice low but shaking now. "Everybody stay on. Maintain heading." The air pressure dropped again, ears popping, throats clenching, a deep ache that sank into the jaw. My headset buzzed with white noise so loud it vibrated my skull. I could feel my pulse pounding behind my eyes. "Cabin pressure failing," Dalton barked. But the dials didn't move. The reading showed steady, false calm on every instrument. That was when the silence started. The hum of the engines went hollow, muffled, like we were sealed in a vacuum. You could see the props still spinning, but the sound didn't belong to them anymore. It was distant, like hearing through glass. Then came the smell, burnt wiring again, heavier, with an edge of ozone. My throat filled with it, that scorched taste of metal. "We got a short somewhere," I said, half to myself, half to anyone listening. I ducked down under the console again, flashlight beam cutting through cables. Nothing scorched, nothing wrong. The smell was there but without a source. I straightened up and found Harris watching me. His face looked like it was carved from the same aluminum as the plane. "Get me a fix," he said quietly. Green was already scribbling across his map, doing manual dead reckoning, wind drift, time, speed. The kind of math no one trusted anymore but him. He worked in silence for a long time. When he looked up, he was pale. "We're too high," he said softly. "Way too high. We shouldn't even be able to maintain this altitude with the weight we're carrying." "Say again?" "We're above operational ceiling, by 1,000 feet at least." Harris frowned. "Impossible." "I ran it twice," Green said. 3 times. He swallowed. "We're higher than this plane can climb, but the engines aren't straining. We didn't ascend. We just drifted up here." He tapped the altimeter. "This isn't our airspace anymore." The words hung there, heavier than the frost forming along the bulkhead seams. "Control, this is 419, Harris said into the mic. "We're experiencing interference. Request position verification." The reply came in fragments, cut by static. 419, copy, radar, lost, position, confirm. I answered, giving our coordinates. Then a pause. Negative, the voice said, and it sounded older now, hoarse, distant. Those coordinates? Off course by 60 miles east. I stared at Green. He shook his head. No, he mouthed, pencil frozen in his hand. Harris looked straight ahead. The second plane still glided before us. Same distance, same height, same type. It didn't waver, didn't fade, didn't climb. It was locked to us. And when Harris whispered, "We're not over Alaska anymore," I believed him. Outside, the world below changed color again. The ridges that had been bright white were now silver gray, glinting with an oily sheen like ice melting over metal. The rivers gleamed faintly, glowing from underneath as if something alive pulsed beneath the frozen surface. The horizon didn't bend like it should. It looked stretched, wrong, curved upward like we were flying inside a bowl. Dalton was staring out his side window, his face blank. "That's not snow," he said under his breath. "That's not snow at all." The compass needle finally gave up, spinning, halting, spinning again, like a wheel that had lost gravity. I was shaking, trying to keep my handwriting steady as I logged. Unusual visual distortion, instruments unreliable, duplicate aircraft maintaining fixed position, crew reporting altered visual terrain. I remember thinking how calm those words looked compared to what I felt. Then the voices came back. Not one this time, many. Our own transmissions echoing in a chorus, slightly out of sync, looping through time. Every phrase we'd spoken in the last 10 minutes played again. 419 on course. Copy control. Altitude study. Slight interference. Over and over. Stacked on top of each other like overlapping ghosts. Collins slammed his fist on the console. "Turn us around," he shouted. "We're done with this." Harris hesitated. The silence after that command felt endless. Finally, he said it, not loud, but final. "We turn before it closes." I didn't know what he meant by it, but he did. He banked the yoke left, gentle and deliberate, the way he always flew, controlled, precise. The moment we turned, everything broke loose. It felt like we hit a wall made of air. The plane jolted so hard it threw me against the harness. Lights blew out, dead black again. Then, a metallic scream tore through the fuselage. Pure vibration, teeth rattling, gut deep. My headset shrieked, static turning into a single continuous howl. I could hear men yelling through the intercom, but every voice overlapped. The pressure dropped so fast it felt like my skull might implode. I couldn't breathe. I saw red flashes outside the windows, then white, then red again. Strobing light painted Harris's face like fire. He was fighting the yoke with both arms now, every muscle straining. The noise became a physical thing, like the air itself was tearing apart around us. The smell of burning insulation turned to raw heat, my mouth filled with the taste of copper. I ripped the headset off, but the screaming didn't stop. It wasn't in the radio anymore. It was in the air, in the metal, in us. We'd left the world behind, and whatever we'd flown into wasn't sky anymore. It happened fast and slow at the same time, like falling through a dream where everything is both frozen and violent. The first blast came from the left side, a deep metallic thud that rippled through the fuselage like a heartbeat skipping. The left outboard engine blew. I heard the detonation before I saw the flash. The sound was low and hollow, like a vault door slamming shut on the world. Metal shrapnel punched through the outer skin and clattered down the corridor behind us. A few sparks flared near the aft bulkhead, then vanished into the dark. The smell of fuel hit a second later, sharp and hot, cutting through the cold. Dalton shouted over the intercom, something about pressure loss and hydraulics, but the words drowned beneath the static. The aircraft lurched left, a violent twist that wrenched my shoulder against the harness. Harris fought it with both hands, his knuckles bone white against the yoke. Every movement looked like it was costing him years. I could feel the entire airframe shuddering under us, each vibration deeper than the one before, like the plane itself was groaning in pain. I tried to look out the side window, but the light outside was no longer light, it was chaos. Strobes of red and white flared through the frost-covered glass, rapid and uneven, like lightning caught in a jar. The flashes weren't coming from inside the cockpit, they were outside, in the sky, moving too fast to belong to any aircraft. The aurora bled into them, green and violet streaks wrapping the horizon like torn ribbons of energy. Except this wasn't any aurora I'd ever seen. It didn't shimmer, it pulsed. It was structured, angular, as if built from invisible machinery, bending around us in panels and walls. Between the flashes, I caught glimpses of the terrain below. Only it wasn't the Alaska I knew. The shapes were wrong. The ridgelines were knife-sharp, not rounded like glacial cuts. Rivers gleamed like molten metal, glowing beneath the ice. as if something hot ran underneath the crust of the world. "Mayday, mayday, mayday," I called into the mic. "Flight 419, heavy damage, engine loss, descending." Static swallowed my words. I tried again. This time I could hear my own voice return through the speaker a split second later, stretched and slurred. It was like the air itself was mocking me. Then the altimeter needles fell to 0. Not a slow drop, just dead. Everything blank. The dials stopped spinning, the lights blinked out again, and the only illumination left came from the bleeding aurora, wrapping us in that impossible color. Collins was half out of his seat, shouting something I couldn't catch. His voice cracked. The intercom howled with overlapping feedback. Half the voices sounded like us, the other half didn't. Some came before we spoke, some after, repeating words we hadn't said yet. Dalton was yelling for throttle control. Hands burned and blistered. I saw the flesh of his right arm peeling where the sleeve had melted. "Fire in the left nacelle," he screamed. "We're losing pressure." Then nothing. His voice cut mid-sentence. I turned to look, but he was slumped forward, smoke curling around him, body limp, eyes glassy. Sykes shouted something from the rear, "Cargo loose," and then came the crunch of metal as the restraints gave way. A crate broke free and slammed forward, tearing through the bulkhead like it was made of paper. The plane jolted again, rolling hard to port. My vision went black around the edges, blood pressing against my skull from the centrifugal pull. I bit my tongue, tasted iron, and tried to breathe. Couldn't. The oxygen mask dangled loose from the wall, torn free by the jolt. I reached for it, hands slipping against the freezing metal. Harris was still at the controls, eyes wide and blood running from his nose. Teeth gritted so hard I thought they'd crack. He wasn't steering anymore. He was wrestling the plane like it was alive and trying to buck him off. The red-white flashes outside multiplied until it looked like we were flying through a strobe-lit tunnel of fire. The sky wasn't sky anymore. It was folding in on itself, bands of light twisting and tightening like muscle fibers. The aurora's green bled into violet, and then the color shifted into something I can't describe, something that didn't belong in any human spectrum. The air thickened. Every surface began to vibrate, even our bones. The metal screamed, not from strain, but from something else. Some resonance that made it sound like the aircraft was singing a note too deep for ears. The floor buckled under my boots. Gravity turned sideways. 1 second I was strapped in, the next I was slammed against the sidewall, weightless and heavy at once. My vision doubled, tripled, the cockpit spinning in impossible geometry. For a heartbeat I thought I saw 2 Harrises, one real, one ghosted behind him, each moving fractions out of sync. The other C-124 was still visible through the front glass, our twin, except now it wasn't ahead of us. It was everywhere, overlapping with our plane like 2 reels of film run at once. I could see the reflection of its cockpit within ours, and for a moment, I swore I saw myself staring back, frozen mid-breath. The headset exploded with sound again, layered screams, voices of every man on the crew, but wrong. Stretched, backward, reversed. It wasn't radio noise anymore. It was us, played through a broken speaker at the edge of time. The pain in my head was unbearable. The noise felt like it was drilling straight into the bone. I tore the headset off and still heard it ringing in my skull. The air was full of static and light, thick enough to see. Everything blurred together. The cockpit, the sky, the sound of our own dying machine. I could feel the heat of the burning engine even through the fuselage. Then a flash brighter than anything I'd ever seen split the cabin open. For a moment, all sound cut out. No war, no metal, no scream, just silence, clean and perfect. The world froze. In that stillness, I could see everything in razor detail. The floating frost particles caught midair. Harris's eyes wide open and bloodshot. Collins braced with his arm across the console. My own reflection staring back from the dead black of the windshield. Then gravity returned like a hammer. The plane snapped downward, the nose dropping so hard it felt like my soul had left my body. The horizon spun. The world outside became a carousel of white and black. I was weightless again, then crushed into the seat. The alarm screamed back to life, half dead, glitching tones shrieking over each other. Red light washed the cockpit, blinking in slow motion. "Pull up," I shouted, but the words felt pointless. We weren't flying anymore. We were falling. Harris's mouth moved, but I couldn't hear him. The smell of burning insulation turned sweet, like sugar over fire. The world around me stretched thin, time smearing. I remember thinking the light outside wasn't moving past us. It was moving through us. The last thing I saw before the blackout was Harris, still gripping the yoke with everything he had, blood dripping from his nose, eyes locked on nothing, refusing to let go even as the universe came apart around him. When I came to, everything was red. Not bright red, but that dark emergency hue that pulses like a heartbeat in hell. The cockpit was half gone, ripped open along the left side where the panel had torn away. Snow blasted in through the hole, whipping in spirals around the shattered instruments. I could taste metal and smoke. My mouth was full of blood and the copper sting of ozone. I didn't remember unbuckling, but I was on the deck, body twisted, ears ringing so loud it felt like my skull might crack. For a few seconds, I couldn't tell if I was alive or still falling. Then the cold bit through the smoke, sharp and clean. That's how I knew we hadn't hit the ground yet. We were still airborne, somehow, flying on a crippled carcass of steel. I crawled to my knees, gripping the seat frame for balance. Harris was slumped forward, head twisted at an impossible angle. Collins lay half out of his harness, his face drenched in blood, chest barely moving. Dalton was conscious but barely. His uniform was torn open, skin blistered raw where his sleeve had burned away. Both his hands were locked around the throttle, as if letting go meant the world would end faster. "We're still flying," he gasped. I looked out through the ruined window and realized he was right. The plane was still level, broken, bleeding, and somehow still airborne. The howl of the wind outside was deafening, a constant scream as the snow whipped through the gap where the fuselage had split. Sparks flared from torn wiring, tiny orange bursts that died as fast as they appeared. "Control, this is Flight 419, emergency, engine failure, heavy damage, descending fast," I shouted into the radio. Nothing. Then, faintly, through the static, a voice answered. It wasn't clear, but it was real. 419, we thought you were gone. You dropped off radar at 1420. It's 1450 now. Say status. I froze. For us, it had been seconds, maybe a minute since the hit, but according to them, we'd been missing for 30. I glanced at the clock on the dash. It was running 30 minutes ahead of my written log. My heart dropped. "We've lost an engine," I said. "We're on fire. We're going down." Dalton coughed, voice raw and ragged. "Harris won't wake up," he muttered. I looked over. Harris was gone. No movement, no breath, just blood dripping from his temple into his collar. Collins stirred, mumbling something incoherent, breath rattling. Green was missing completely, his seat empty, harness ripped clean through. I called for Sykes over the interphone. No answer, only static. "Hold her steady," I shouted, grabbing the yoke beside Dalton. He tried, but his strength was fading. The control column jerked in our hands, heavy as stone. The horizon tilted again. Through the gaping wound in the fuselage, I could see the ground coming up, fast. Snowfields and jagged ice rushing closer, the world swallowing us whole. Dalton yelled something wordless and pulled hard on the remaining throttle. The engine groaned, sputtered, and died. The silence that followed was the worst sound I've ever heard. Just the wind and the groan of metal under stress. "Brace," I screamed, over and over, voice hoarse. "Brace, brace." The plane hit. Not an explosion, just impact. A colossal punch that tore everything out of me. My body slammed against the straps. Something in my back popped like glass breaking. The noise wasn't one sound. It was all of them at once. Crunching steel, screaming wind, the shriek of tearing aluminum, and the dull final thud of snow-absorbing force. Everything went white, then black, then gone. When consciousness returned, the world was silent except for the wind. I was lying on my back in snow, staring up at a pale sky that didn't seem to move. My ribs ached with every breath. My arm hung wrong at my side. The plane was in pieces, torn open like a carcass, smoke bleeding upward in thin threads. The fuselage lay half buried, jagged like a broken spine. I tried to stand, legs trembling. Each step felt like walking through water. The air cut like knives, freezing inside my lungs. I stumbled toward the wreckage, calling names, Dalton, Collins, Sykes, but the wind carried the words away. I found Dalton first, still strapped in, neck bent, eyes open. Dawn. Harris was beneath part of the nose section, crushed under the twisted frame. Collins lay half in, half out of the torn side, breathing in shallow gasps that sounded more like bubbles. His eyes were open, but he wasn't seeing anymore. I turned away, swallowing bile. I called again for Green, for Sykes. Nothing. That's when I saw it. About 20 yards from the wreck, half buried in snow, was another aircraft. Same shape, same size, the same damn plane. My plane. The same tail number, 419, burned and frostbitten, older looking, as if it had been sitting there for years. The left wing was sheared the same way, the same black scorch trailing across its flank. My knees gave out. I stumbled toward it, one slow step at a time, not feeling the cold anymore. The wind howled between the two wrecks like it was laughing. The snow had drifted against the second fuselage, covering half the insignia, but I could still make it out. The same squadron mark, the same cargo stencils, the same everything. It wasn't possible. It couldn't be possible. I reached out a trembling hand and touched the metal. It was cold, real, solid, crusted with ice. I could feel it beneath my glove, the weight of truth pressing down on my chest until I couldn't breathe. "How can we crash next to our own crash?" I whispered. No answer, just the wind. My body started to shake. I think I screamed, but no sound came out. The cold was inside me now, down to the bone, filling every space where reason used to live. Somewhere above, I heard the distant thump of rotors, rescue birds maybe, or something else entirely. I didn't care. I sank to my knees between the two planes, hands buried in the snow, staring at the duplicate wreckage that shouldn't exist. The last thing I remember before the world went dark again was how quiet it was. Quiet like the air itself was holding its breath, waiting to see which of us would wake up in the right world. The next thing I remember is the sound of voices, muffled at first, distant, like echoes from underwater. Then hands on me, rough and cold, dragging me through the snow. I blinked against the light and saw figures moving through the storm, silhouettes in parkas, faces hidden behind goggles and scarves. Rotor blades thundered somewhere close, chopping the wind into sharp bursts. I tried to speak, but my throat was raw, frozen. One of them leaned down, shouted something I couldn't make out, and then a wool blanket wrapped around my shoulders. The world tilted sideways again. When I woke, I was in a tent, a field station by the look of it, canvas walls rattling under gusts of wind. A lantern swung from the support beam, its glow pale and shaky. My arm was bandaged. Behind the woods, the thread came up. My father had no move. I saw the things coming tight, tightness. Every breath hurt, but the pain felt distant, muffled by exhaustion. A medic crouched beside me, checking my pulse. "You're lucky to be breathing," he said. His voice was calm but cautious, like he didn't want to believe it himself. "We pulled you off the ice about an hour ago. You're the only one still conscious. The others?" I rasped. He looked away for a beat. "They didn't make it." The words hit harder than the crash. My mind tried to replay every name. Harris, Dalton, Sykes, Green, Collins. I saw their faces flicker behind my eyes, half lit by the red glow of the dying cockpit. "We lost contact with your flight for 30 minutes, he continued. "You vanished off radar completely. Then you reappeared out of nowhere. Same altitude, same heading, already going down." Nobody could explain it. I tried to sit up, but my body refused. "The clocks," I said. "Check the clocks." He frowned. "What?" "The cockpit clocks. Every one of them. They'll be 30 minutes ahead." He gave me a strange look, the kind reserved for men talking nonsense, and didn't answer. He moved away to speak to someone outside the tent. I could hear fragments, wreckage field, multiple debris zones. Coordinates don't match. I shut my eyes and tried to slow my breathing. Every time I blinked, I saw it again. The second plane, half buried in the snow, identical to ours. Frost crawling across its skin, like time itself had frozen it in place. When I opened my eyes again, I was lying in a proper bed, the kind with white sheets and humming fluorescent lights overhead. The air smelled of antiseptic and metal. Base hospital. Warm, quiet, too bright. My arm was in a sling, and an IV snaked into my hand. Two men stood near the door, one in uniform, the other in a dark civilian suit. The officer wore no squadron patch, just clean blues and a practiced smile. The civilian's hair was silver, his eyes hidden behind thin glasses. They waited until the nurse left, then stepped closer. "Sergeant Walter Miller," the officer said softly. "We need to go over what happened." His voice was polite, too polite. I told them everything, every sound, every flash, every impossible moment. The magnetic interference over the range, the frost forming on the inside of the glass, the phantom transmission of our own voices echoing back in delay. The second aircraft, our twin, leading us through dead air, the blackout, the tearing sky, the crash, the duplicate wreckage lying in the snow beside us. I told them about the clocks, the missing time, Green's vanished seatbelt, the way control said we'd been gone half an hour when it felt like seconds. I told them all of it. The officer took notes without looking up. The civilian just listened, expression unreadable. When I finished, silence filled the room. I could hear the faint buzz of the lights, the tick of a clock somewhere behind them. The officer cleared his throat. "You understand, Sergeant," he began, "that you sustained a significant concussion. Severe trauma can distort perception." I stared at him. "You think I imagined two planes?" He smiled dimly. "What we think," he said, "is that there was a magnetic anomaly. The haze range is notorious for instrument failure. Visibility was poor, conditions extreme. Disorientation could explain what you experienced." "Disorientation didn't put another 419 in the ice," I said quietly. "That's impossible." The civilian finally spoke, his voice low and deliberate. "We found one wreck, Surgeon. One. Your plane. No duplicate. No second debris field. Nothing to indicate another aircraft went down." I shook my head. "It was there. I touched it." "You were hypothermic," he said. "You'd been exposed for hours. The mind sees what it must to survive." I didn't respond. He didn't press. The officer nodded toward a recorder on the desk. "We'd like you to listen to the cockpit audio." He pressed play. The hiss of the tape filled the room, followed by my own voice, calm, professional, almost mechanical. Magnetic interference increasing. Cabin temperature dropping. Internal frost forming. Duplicate contact visible. Then static. Then my voice again. Lower now. Trembling. "We didn't crash. We crossed over." I froze. "I never said that," I whispered. The officer stopped the tape. The civilian folded his hands. "It's on record," he said. The tape was recovered intact. Neither man spoke again. The officer finally stood, closing his notebook. "The official cause," he said, "is pilot disorientation due to weather interference resulting in loss of control." He paused. "You'll be released to duty once cleared by medical." Then they both left. The door clicked shut behind them, leaving only the hum of the lights. I lay there staring at the ceiling, my pulse still hammering in my throat. They could call it disorientation, weather, stress, whatever they wanted, but I knew what I saw. There were two wrecks on that ice, one dying in the snow, one that had already been there waiting for us. And somewhere between them, for 30 missing minutes, we hadn't just flown through a storm, we'd flown into something that wasn't ours. I stayed in that base hospital for another 2 weeks, body healing faster than my mind ever could. Every night, I woke up choking on the sound of static that wasn't there, my hands still reaching for the headset that no longer existed. The doctors called it trauma response, but I knew better. The air inside that tent, the flicker of aurora through torn metal, it stayed in me like a second heartbeat. The brass never brought up the crash again. No ceremony, no final report, just a quiet burial for the crew and a file stamped closed. They told me I'd done well under impossible conditions, that survival was commendable, but nobody ever said what I'd survived. I was discharged on temporary leave, with a new uniform, a commendation, and orders not to discuss classified flight events. They didn't have to tell me twice. Nobody believed the truth anyway. When I signed out of the ward, the civilian from before, silver-haired, calm, detached, was waiting in the hallway. He handed me a sealed envelope. "Your official debrief," he said. "Keep it locked up." His tone wasn't a suggestion. I asked him one question before he turned away. "Did you check the clocks?" He stopped mid-step but didn't turn. "Instruments get jarred in crashes," he said evenly. "They don't tell stories." Then he left. For days afterward, I wandered the base like a ghost. I'd catch myself looking north every time the wind changed, half expecting to see another C-124 crawling across that endless Alaskan sky. I couldn't eat much, couldn't sleep. I started keeping notes in a small green logbook, the same one I'd used during flight. My handwriting had changed. The letters were tighter, almost clawed. Each page filled with fragments, echo of own voice, compass spinning, same coordinates, 2 readings, some light wrong angle. The more I wrote, the less sense it made, but I couldn't stop. I still heard the clicking sometimes, faint and steady, usually when the generator hum got too quiet. Tick, 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 like someone marking time just outside my door. A week after they cleared me to return home, a tech from crash recovery found me in the mess hall. He was pale, eyes bloodshot. "You were on 419, right?" he asked. I nodded. He hesitated, glanced around, then lowered his voice. "We logged the instruments for the investigation. Every clock we pulled from the wreck, radio timer, flight chronometer, even Harris's wristwatch. They were all 30 minutes ahead of base time. Exactly 30. I mentioned it to the recovery captain. You know what he said? He told me to forget it. Then he walked away before I could answer. That night, I sat alone in the barracks, staring at the envelope they'd given me. My fingers shook as I tore it open. Inside was a single page, typed, official. Cause of accident, pilot disorientation and magnetic interference resulting in catastrophic airframe failure. Nothing else. No mention of duplicate radar contact. No mention of missing time. Nothing about the echo transmissions or the second wreck. At the bottom, the signature line wasn't Harris's or any commanding officer I knew. It was the civilian's. His name had been blacked out with ink so heavy it dented the paper. I put in for transfer the next morning. By spring, I was stationed back stateside, far from the cold, far from haze range, far from anything that could remind me of the sound of my own voice repeating through dead air. But Alaska never really left me. Sometimes, on quiet nights, I'd dream of that frozen horizon, the moment the sun bent wrong, the world folding in on itself. I'd see the other plane hovering just ahead, perfectly still, waiting for us to follow. Every time, we did. Every time, I woke up right before the impact, heart hammering, ears ringing with that same broken transmission. Flight 419, come back. They told me later that the wreckage was cleared within a month. Officially, only one plane was ever recovered. But a friend from maintenance, someone who'd been at the site before the brass sealed it off, told me in a whisper that the recovery crews swore they saw duplicate serials stamped into two separate fuselage panels. Like they printed the same tail number twice, he said, and then one just disappeared. He laughed when he said it, but not the kind of laugh that means it's funny. I left the service that year, never flew again. Civilian life felt quieter, safer, but I could never shake the feeling that part of me hadn't come back from that flight. That somewhere out there, on that dead stretch of ice beneath the northern lights, another me was still sitting in that cockpit, headset on, logging interference, chasing a plane that wasn't real. I kept that green logbook. Sometimes I take it out, read the last entry in my own handwriting, the one I don't remember writing. We didn't crash. We crossed over. So that's what happened on February 3rd, 1959. That's what no one ever printed in the reports. And if you're watching this wondering whether it was weather or panic or madness that killed my crew, maybe it was all three. Or maybe we flew too far into something we were never meant to see. Either way, the sky took us. And for 30 minutes, it didn't give us back. If you made it this far, hit like, hit subscribe, and tell me where you're watching from. And remember, somewhere over the Alaska range, there's still an echo on the frequency that answers to Flight 419. Keep your radios off when you fly that route. And if you ever hear your own voice calling back, don't answer. And that's the story of Flight 419, the Alaskan military transport that vanished for 30 minutes and came back from somewhere no one could explain. Some say it was magnetic interference. Others think it slipped through time itself. Whatever it was, it left something up there in that frozen sky that never came back down. If you made it this far, thank you for watching. Make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next story. Drop a comment below, tell me where you're watching from, and what you think really happened to Flight 419. This is Captain Meany, signing off. And this is a comparison to the matter that people within you, take your head or something you want, all fly unforgiving and working for you.